Basically, we wanted to pick your brains on the operation of the north end from Everett to, or, Inner Bay to Bellingham. One of the first questions that I have is, there wouldn't have been a lot of traffic going north from Burlington to Canada. And if there was, it would come down to Everett before it would go north on one of the Canadian trains?
Nope.
No.
They ran a New West turn from Burlington to New Westminster. So they would take any stuff that went to the north would go on that. Yeah, that was a local.
Yeah. So
now in the BN times, like your railroad, they would hook up the Anacortes and the concrete locomotives. They'd MU them, and that's what they ran the Burlington turn with. There was quite a bit of traffic that came from the north. Propane and butane cars came from the north.
But were they going to the concrete or the Anacortes branch?
Anacortes out to the refineries, and then you had sulfur cars. Canadian cars of sulfur would come down to Scott Paper from the north and go out to Anacortes. There was traffic going north, but not as much as going south.
When you say from Scott Paper, that's in Bellingham, right?
Nope, Anacortes. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
And it was still working in the early 70s.
And where was the sulfur coming from?
Canada. It was interchanged from the CN at New Westminster.
Okay. Did you have a question, Doug?
Yeah, I did. So I want to make sure I understand which era we're talking about. So my interest is GN prior to BN, mostly 40s and 50s. But one of my questions was, in the GN days, were there tank cars from Anacortes? Were they brought down to Inner Bay or anything like that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so the oiler didn't pull anything from Anacortes.
No, they didn't. They didn't ship oil out of there. Those are refineries out there.
Okay, so
and most of the product went out by truck.
Okay.
So they were shipping crude oil into there?
By tankers, by ships.
But not by rail?
No, not. If there was, it was virtually nothing.
And
well, I knew they were refineries, but I wondered if they shipped out any refined products in tank cars on the train, but apparently not.
You know, I would really have to ask Herbie Sandhop about that to be sure. Most of what come out of there was diesel and gasoline.
Right, but you're saying that was trucked or barged?
Almost all of it was by truck, and there was some barge.
Okay.
Now, in my 40s, let's say I go back to the 40s, maybe there was some train traffic.
There's Sadie.
There's Sadie.
Yeah. Oh, and yeah, the question was, maybe back in the 40s, possibly they shipped diesel and gasoline out of there by train. I don't know.
I couldn't tell you. I don't know for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, what about?
I think mostly what you would get shipped out of there was products that were in cases, like cases of oil and stuff.
Oh, so maybe some boxcar loads.
Yeah.
Right. That makes sense.
So usually there was warehouses there. Most of the tank car traffic going into those places was butane and propane, which they used to fire the cracking towers.
And that came from
lots
Canada?
And lots of propane cars.
Did that come from Canada or from Montana?
It came down from the north.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that came from the Antalco line later on anyway.
What about the Edmonds and Mount Richmond refineries?
You know, they loaded tank cars there.
Right.
But I really can't tell you, because
I think
that was pretty much gone when I worked there.
Right. You told me something about the Department of Defense transloading facility, which was in Mukilteo, right?
Yep.
And that was taking in kerosene that went to the Air Force bases.
Yes. They had pipelines up to Payne Field too.
Is that what's, there's some remnants of some tanks and an old dock still there or recently removed?
You
Is
mean
that
in
the site you're talking about?
Mukilteo? You
Yeah,
mean in Mukilteo?
Yes.
Yes, that was Department of Defense, and they had a big dock there too.
Okay, so that's the kerosene operation.
Right.
JP4 jet fuel, and in the 60s, I know it was JP4, and it both went south and it went east to Spokane too.
And then Wells Point, that was Standard Oil, I think.
Yeah, Point Wells, that was Standard
Or
Oil.
Point Wells.
They had a small fracking tower there, and lots of storage for gasoline.
Did they ship any
It was a
tank
small
cars in or out of there?
Well, in the late 60s and into the 70s, most of the tank car traffic in and out of there was asphalt, because they had an asphalt plant there too. I mean, not you know, the oil, the thick stuff they use for asphalt.
Oh,
Okay, well, that's something
That
for
would-
tankers.
Yeah, and that would go out in those big insulated tank cars because they heated it up so they could pump it in and out of those cars.
Well, that's good to know. I don't know that.
Those were nice to be around in the winter. And also there were a few boxcar loads of oil, canned oil in boxes and things like that, you know, supplies. Stuff they actually packaged and cans of oil there at Point Wells at one time. Union Oil had a dock at Edmonds.
So the oiler in Great Northern days, that went out of Inner Bay, correct?
Yes, Inner Bay to Everett and back.
Okay, and so it, where did it do its stuff? You know, pickups and drop-offs.
It worked. I'm drawing a blank. I can't remember the name of that place now. There's a couple 3-yard tracks there.
Okay, I think I've seen it on the tracks.
Richmond Beach. That's what it was.
Oh yeah, Richmond Beach, right.
It was mainly they just would shuffle cars there, and sometimes they'd leave cars there, storage. You know, they had to go another day somewhere. But their big work was Point Wells and Mukilteo. And then they also transferred cars from Inner Bay up to Delta Yard too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. So, and did they transfer them back from Everett to Inner Bay? Also?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
so they picked them up at Everett Junction?
They went into Delta Yard.
Oh, they did go to Delta, okay.
Yeah. That train could sometimes be a mile long with only one Jeep on it.
Well, it's all water level. So.
Yeah, there is up and down on it though, but it's not much. It's enough to make one Jeep work pretty good. Most of the time the oiler wasn't that huge of a train, but occasionally it would be really big. Most of the time it was between 10 to 20 cars or so.
And when it was really big, where were the cars going? The extra cars?
They were mostly cars that were just going between Seattle and Everett or the other way.
But I mean,
just stuff they needed to move. Yeah, just general merchandise, whatever.
But, oh yeah, just not local for local switching, just to move the stuff up there. So like a transfer run, basically.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they take those cars that they brought back and they classify them at Inner Bay and then send them out on whatever train they needed to go on or whatever.
No, they didn't do the classifying. That was that's a yard with switch engines, so that would have been a time slip. They just landed the train and the switch crews broke it up.
No, I mean the transfer, when they brought cars from Everett to Inner Bay or vice versa, they bring them to the yard and then the yard switcher would then classify them or do whatever with them. Is that right?
Yes.
So Jim, this is Ray Wheeler and Doug Paasch. Jim Betz.
Hi, Jim.
Pleased to meet you guys and see you, even if we can't see each other in person.
Right. So we're just sort of randomly asking Ray Wheeler questions until he gets sick of it and disconnects. So I was going to ask if you could just talk for a minute about the interchanges with the UP in Milwaukee and traffic that would move from there to Stacy and then from Stacy to Inner Bay. You just have any comments about any of that?
You mean the interchange at Seattle?
Yeah, and state, well, it was Argo and Waterfront Yard, right?
Well, in a BN days, it was Argo. Prior to that, and prior to the building of Alaskan Way Viaduct,
Mm-hmm.
there was a yard west of Stacy Street, and that's where the interchanges were, all of them.
Oh, and that got taken over by the viaduct?
Yeah, when they built, there's the old Alaskan Way that runs to the west of 99.
Right.
Well, 99 cut right through that yard. It was called I think it was called the Whatcom Yard. And that's where all the interchanges were out there.
Okay.
When that highway was built through there, they moved the interchanges out to Argo.
I see. So is that before or after Doug's period? The viaduct was built in the 50s.
The viaduct was 52, as I recall.
So Doug, are you going to have that before or after the viaduct?
Well, I don't want to build a viaduct, so the viaduct just disappeared magically off the face of the earth.
Great.
Sort of
So
like
you
recently.
So
Just
are
like
you
it
going?
did, yeah.
So are you going to have the Whatcom Yard then? Sounds like.
I don't have that much territory, but I am trying to get a small Stacy Street yard and a small Milwaukee yard. I could dedicate maybe 2 tracks or something to a Whatcom yard.
Yeah. Well, that would be. Ray, are you saying that both the Milwaukee and the UP would use the Whatcom Yard?
And yes, and the Great Northern and the NP.
Well, that's what
all
I
of
mean.
them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Now there was
Yeah, 'cause
there
I'm
was a
familiar
Great
with the Argo.
There was the Pacific Coast Yard also in between the Milwaukee and the Stacy Yard, NP Stacy.
Yeah, I don't think I can fit all those yards in, but I am familiar with the Argo interchange tracks. And anyway, I'm going to have to fudge around some more on that.
Yeah.
Jim, that's probably of
It's
no
always a
interest to you because
compromise.
we're talking Seattle here, but maybe we should talk more about your Burlington and Anacortes and stuff. Well, Jim's
Yeah. Okay. That's good.
Well, I gained something from everything, but yes, my focus is on Skagit County. So, Ray, if I remember right, you started working right around the time of, quote, just before the BN merger?
I started about a year after the merger.
I thought you said something about running the concrete job. I thought the concrete job ended as soon as they closed down the plants in '68.
No, oh no, it still continued. The concrete local did all the switching at Burlington and at Mount Vernon and down as far as, well, we called it Fur, but that's Conway on our road maps.
Okay.
So they did all that work.
And what about the work at, was there a mill at Hamilton?
Yes, sir. The big industry there was the sand company, Northwest something. What was that called?
Olivine.
Olivine. Yeah,
Northwest
the Olivine plant. There was a sawmill called Supreme Cedar that was at Lyman, and also at Birdsview. There was a little spur that would hold one boxcar, and there was like 2 brothers ran a shake plant there, and they'd load about 1 car a week.
Oh,
But the main work up on that line was at the Olivine at Hamilton and the Supreme Cedar. This is east of Cedar Woolley, of course.
Yep.
And up at Concrete, the cement plant was totally they weren't doing anything. There was a small lumber yard at the west end there too. At what did they call that place? Birdsview, I think. It was right near the west end of the concrete siding.
Okay. I thought I know there was a lumber mill right there at just west of the junction of the Baker River and the Skagit.
Yeah, that was Hamilton Junction. No,
Hamilton Junction was further west by a lot. but I don't know, maybe it was maybe the industry was called Hamilton. I didn't think so. So do you know when the bridge, the Baker River Bridge was pulled out?
You know, I think that was really late. It was probably in about 68 or 69.
Essentially right after the cement plant in East Concrete shut down.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
It was when Seattle got the kiln is when it killed all those plants up there. The one at Grotto too. Yeah, for years and years, all those plants and the one at Bellingham would ship the cement product down to Seattle, and
Okay.
Seattle was mainly just storage. But then when they got their own kiln, that was the death knell for those plants up there. At least that's what Herbie Sandhoff says. He's an old GN conductor, and he worked the Anacortes and concrete a lot.
Okay. Is he still around?
He still is around, yep.
Well, you'll have to get me hooked up to talk to him.
Yeah.
Does he come to your office?
Sorry.
No, his health is not real good, so he doesn't come out anymore. He used to come here quite a bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where does he live?
I got a question.
He lives about a mile from me,
Okay.
so he's close by. He's also a shirt tail relative as well. So.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Ray, didn't you tell me that there was a guy that would fill a gondola car with one dump truck load at a time with talc?
Yes, yeah. He'd usually take a hopper car, sometimes a gon. It was it was on the west end of the siding at concrete, and it was an elevated ramp that he could back up over top of the car and dump into it.
Oh, so he could dump right from his truck into the hopper car.
Yeah, he'd back up that ramp and just let her rip.
And was that like a timber ramp, or was it a dirt?
It was timber. Yeah, it was timber. Yeah.
And where was he getting his talc?
I don't know.
But that's interesting.
Wasn't there was a narrow gauge railroad there that brought stuff into the cement plant from some quarry. Limestone, maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe it was limestone he was loading.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I can't remember.
Was that on a spur, or was that just the siding?
It's right on the siding.
Right on the siding. So you mentioned that there was a lumber operation on the east end of that siding.
It was west of the concrete siding.
Was that a separate spur?
Yes.
Okay.
Not very long. It would only hold 2 or 3 cars tops.
So there's two things on the west end of the siding. There's a spur.
Yeah, right in that area.
The spur for the lumber area and the guy loading the hopper. Was that outgoing lumber, or was that a lumber yard taking incoming lumber?
That was outgoing, I believe.
Okay. So some kind of a sawmill then.
Real small mill. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So, Ray, it's my understanding that during my era, which is 46 to 55, that the trains on the concrete branch and the Anacortes branch were all originated out of Burlington. Is that true? Does that fit with your knowledge?
As best as I can tell you, the concrete local was always a Burlington that I know. It went out of Burlington. The Anacortes local, I believe in the 40s, ran out of Interbay. And later on, it was based out of Delta Yard for a while. In BN days, of course, they were both out of there. Out of
Delta. They both originated out of Delta.
Oh, Burlington. In the Burlington Northern era, they were both out of Burlington.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The Anacortes job, I know way back, early was out of Interbay, and I'm not sure the years. Herbie Sandhoff knows, and I'll have to ask him. But at one point, the business got to be heavy enough on the branch, they moved it to Delta to cut down some of the running time. And then later on, when business was heavier, they moved it to Burlington. So it started at Burlington.
And that was due to the refineries.
Probably, because
Yeah.
the business in Anacortes, as you know, the business in Anacortes fell off pretty bad near the end there.
Yeah, well,
So-
it started falling off in the middle 50s,
Mhm.
and by the 70s, it was essentially all gone.
Right.
And I don't know when they stopped actually running into Anacortes, but I suspect it was probably in the 70s.
There was the times I worked in Anacortes, the only place we went to on the waterfront was Whitney Fidalgo Fish, and that was mechanical reefers, a few going in and out of there.
Yeah,
Scott Paper was still pretty active over on the other side of town. That was still
Okay.
pretty active, and so was the plywood mill. further
plywood
down.
mill, yeah, okay.
That was going pretty good too. The refineries were most of the work.
Yeah, and it's really big now
Mm-hmm.
because they're shipping in back in oil.
Mm-hmm.
Right, crude, right.
And I know that the Anacortes Depot was closed in, I believe it was 37. I know it was the late 30s. Do you know when they stopped running passenger trains on the concrete branch?
Nope, I don't.
I would suspect it's probably close to the same time frame.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the time I was old enough to know anything, in Anacortes, if you went on public conveyance, you took the bus.
Yep. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think the only person out there was the station agent at the depot.
Yes, there was an agent there, and there was that small yard there by the depot, but it was mostly used as a place to store cars while the industries were worked. There was no power stored in Anacortes ever that I know of.
Or who switched the industries from Marysville up to Burlington? What train did those?
It was the Burlington turn.
The Burlington.
So that-
Oh, that's right. You said that on the email. Yeah.
And that originated out of Delta?
Delta, yeah. Maybe early
Yeah,
on it
okay,
was out of
Delta.
Interbay, but this time it was Delta. Yeah.
Okay, that's I remember from the email now.
So the Burlington
Thank you.
the Burlington turn would take cars to Burlington from Delta and then return with a cut for Delta, and not
Yes.
doing it. It would do switching along the way, but nothing that would interfere with the concrete local switching.
No, they would switch Stanwood, and they would switch Marysville.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the Burlington local.
Yeah.
And so the other thing you mentioned before Jim Betz got on the call was that the power for the Anacortes local and the concrete local would MU together and run up to New Westminster.
Yeah.
and
Now
and
this
do
was
the-
BN though.
Oh, but that was in the BN times. Okay. So another question,
yeah.
I don't know if Jim has figured out yet, is how did they take the traffic up and back to New Westminster and Sumas from Burlington?
The North Pole trains, 712s and then the 711s, they did pick up and set out at Burlington and at Bellingham and at New West and then on into Vancouver. So there was more traffic than you'd think going north out of Burlington.
Would they pick up cars in Burlington?
Yes, sir. Even in
those-
BN days, those trains had 3 brakemen. They had a swing brakeman as well as they had rear end brakemen. They did a lot of switching. When you'd get into Canada, there was no hours of service, so they'd do all the switching between Westminster and Vancouver too. Put in some really long days.
Now, my understanding of those trains is that they originated at Interbay and went to Vancouver or New Westminster. Is that correct?
I can tell you at the time of the merger, there were 3 712s. First and second 712s originated at Interbay or Balmer Yard. Third 712, which was the first job I was ever assigned to, ran out of Delta Yard to Vancouver. It was a night job.
Okay, so
It was
so
lousy
did
job.
the ones that originated at Interbay, did they pick up and set out at Everett Junction?
No, they picked up at Delta Yard.
Because somewhere in the past, I've been told a whole bunch of set-outs and pickups happened at Everett Junction, and it sounds like maybe that's not correct.
That's correct for the trains from the east.
Oh, okay, okay.
The trains from the east would set out cars at Everett Junction. They picked up at milepost 31 or sometimes over at Lowell.
Okay, that makes sense.
The North Pool trains did all their Everett work both directions through the Y at Delta Junction.
Okay.
They set out and picked up at Delta through the Y.
Why would the westbound trains pick up cars at Lowell Junction? When...
No, the eastbounds. The eastbounds.
Oh, the eastbounds. Oh,
Would
eastbound. Oh, sorry, eastbound.
pick up. Yeah, milepost 31 usually, but sometimes at Lowell.
Right. So
Yeah.
that eastbound traffic had come down previously from Burlington or New Westminster or whatever.
Yeah. I was just going to mention that it was about a 50-50 split for trains going east. The tonnage out of the north end and out of Seattle was about 50-50. So they'd usually get about half the traffic at Everett.
So let me be clear. So if they are picking up eastbound, they would do that at Lowell. If they were setting out eastbound, would they do that at Lowell also?
The East
Would they
Pool
do that
trains
via-
didn't set out at Everett.
Oh,
Okay, so that was only transfer runs that did that.
that would be for the Oilers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes the North Pool trains would have cars for Everett, but
Oh yeah, the 712. I mean,
Yeah.
Right, 712 could have it. It wouldn't have to be the Oiler. Yeah, I see.
no. Plus, you had the Sky Local too that did roughly the same work on the coastline as the Oiler, but they'd just pick up anything that was undone. Their work was mainly from Delta Yard up to Sky and back.
Right, and that's because they ran later than the Oiler, right?
Yes, it was an afternoon call.
Whatever the Oiler hadn't done, the Sky Local could take care of it on their way to Delta.
Mm-hmm.
Then they would proceed up to Sky Comish.
Yes.
Right, and they would work Gold Bar and all those other places in between.
Yep. Snohomish, Monroe, Gold Bar, wherever.
There was a Grotto local.
That came out of Wenatchee.
That's what I thought. So did they interchange with the Skycomish local at all?
I'm sure they did some.
Bill Sorensen told me one time the Grotto local would leave a cut in Skycomish for one of the westbound trains to pick up and take into Seattle.
Sure. That was their way of bootlegging tonnage over the hill.
Right.
They could move it on the Grotto local and, and pick it up west of there. Didn't limit the train. There was a tonnage limit and length for the hill. So if they had extra traffic, they could move it on the Grotto. Boy, sometimes you'd see that thing and he'd have 4 units on the head end and a 3-unit or 4-unit helper. It's not what you think of as a local.
Right, and then he would leave and so he'd leave a bunch of cars in Sky and go back home to Wenatchee.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Back
and
to
then
Wenatchee.
the next train, having been through the tunnel, would then pick all that stuff up and take it downhill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They also handled the limestone from Nason Creek over to Grotto. And that was moved in orogenies. So if you ever see a train in the old pictures on the hill, that's what it is. It's the Grotto.
Right. So there was a limestone mine there.
It was up on the little Wenatchee River north of Lake Wenatchee.
Yeah.
And it was taken by truck down to the siding at Nason Creek.
Nason Creek siding.
And that's where the Grotto picked them up.
So does that mean that the Grotto local would then take the empties back and spot them there? Right.
Yes. I think Herbie said that siding would hold 16 orogenies, I think he said. I think it was 16.
The Great Northern replaced the Swinomish Slough Bridge in '52. They did the replacement in 3 days, and only one of those was a service day. And the way they did it was, there was the original swing bridge there. and they put the new bridge where the landing of the old bridge was. All they had to do was they put the new bridge on the landing and then took the same barges they had there and moved them across the slough about 20, 30 yards and dropped the old bridge onto the barges, and it was gone. And they started on a Saturday, and it was back in service on Tuesday. But the other important thing about that from that same reference sheet was the first train across the new Swinomish Slough Bridge was steam. There's a picture of it. And I didn't think that there was any steam on the West Coast operating on the GN after, World War II at all, and certainly not into the 50s. But there was. Now, what I don't know is what that engine was, because it doesn't have the logo or the lettering for the GN. It was not a GN engine. It might have been that little engine that's up in New Halem now.
It was the PS and BR. I used to get to work with a really cool guy named Bob Miller. He was an engineer, and his dad worked on those logging railroads up there. And he was telling me that PS and BR, they used to park their steam engine on that little stub spur right behind the Burlington depot when they were done working. I know that picture you're talking about. Did it have the diesel switcher shoving on the rear?
It did not, but the next picture shows a diesel.
Yeah.
So they were both there that day. But I thought it was just interesting. I surmised that the reason they did that was that if something happened and it went in the drink, it was an old steam engine.
Yeah.
Another thing, Ray, you mentioned there was just north of Burlington, there was a dirt loading spur.
Yes, the Belleville pit.
Yeah.
That was it was just pit run loaded there.
Was that dirt from that pit, was that just used by the MOW crews on the railroad, or did that have commercial?
Yeah, it was used for widening and stuff. It was basically just pit run gravel.
Where was that?
It was between Bow and Burlington. There's kind of
okay.
When you leave Burlington, you go over Cook Road, and then the tracks cut underneath the freeway.
Yep.
It's on that straight track right there, just before you get to the curve that turns again toward Bow. Oh, it's right on it's just before you get to the northern curve there, and it's right against the foothills there.
Yeah, there used to be a quarry right here on Burlington Hill.
Oh, I was just going to mention at Burlington, they used to load ballast on that siding that's on the west side of the main line. Now, I don't know how far back they used that for loading ballast, but in BN times for sure, that's where the coastline work train got a lot of its ballast. It came in by dump truck.
Did they have a loading ramp, or do they just do it with a front end loader?
No, wheel loader, yeah. Front end loader. So I don't know if the Great Northern. That's another question Herbie could answer probably.
Would that ballast have been in hoppers or gondolas?
Hart selective ballast cars.
When did the Darigold plant go away?
Ooh.
Was that still operating when you were there?
No, the one down in Cedro or in Mount Vernon was, but not the one at Burlington. The tracks were all overgrown with blackberries. The one at Burlington wasn't used, but there was one down at. They loaded butter down at Mount Vernon. Now, I don't know if Darigold just moved down there when they closed the one at Burlington, or what that was all about.
Well, that was the original Darigold plant, and so it doesn't surprise me that they shut it down. It probably just got so old.
Mm-hmm.
You mean the one in Burlington was the original one?
Yes.
Mm.
That was originally Skagit County Dairymen's Association or something like that.
All right.
Yeah.
And
here's
all the pictures of the plant are really early.
I think at Burlington they called that the condenser Oh, no. Herbie was telling me, because I was asking him questions about concrete. And when the cement plant was in full swing, they would get 6 carloads of coal from the NP at Cedar Woolley every day. They had a little curved interchange track there, and they would pick up 6 hopper cars of coal from Rosalind over there and take them up to the cement plant.
Now, it's my understanding that the NP owned most of the industry work in Cedro. Is that true?
Yes, there was a big lumber mill there that they switched, and a couple other industries. I think the GN switched to Skagit machinery track,
Okay.
and that went across the NP on a diamond as well. And there was another spur on the east side of the NP too. I can't remember what that was. Plus, there was a little spur just east of Cedro called the Cokedale Spur. And I would have to ask Herb what kind of work they did there. In BN times, there was nothing down there.
Yeah.
Jim,
Yeah.
I've got a book of GN and industries in shared territory, whatever you want to call it. I bet you it has Cedro Woolley in it, and I can probably give you a list of what was on GN tracks and what was on NP tracks.
Ray, I want to go back. You said that there was a lot more traffic going north from Burlington than I think there was. I'd like to understand what that traffic was. What kind of products were being shipped north from Burlington?
Usually empties, I think. There was carloads of sulfur would come down in box cars from Canada and go out to the Scott paper mill at Anacortes. That was one of them, and I believe there were tank cars of chemicals, that some of those would come from the north. And later on, when the refineries were going heavier, a lot of that propane and butane, it came either from the Intalco spur or Canada. As far as loads of merchandise, I don't think there was much going north.
Right. I think most of the things like the fish canneries and everything else, they all focused on Seattle. It may have gone back north after going south, but what about forest products like lumber and stuff, plywood? Did that go north ever?
Probably, but there's really not much demand for forest products in Canada. They usually supply it to us.
Okay. And they probably had their own cement plants.
Yeah, there's one at Tilbury Island up there by New West.
Okay.
Big cement plant there.
Yeah, the operation at Concrete was interesting because they had that overhead bucket line that delivered the rock from the quarry up above right down to the plant, went right across the main street of Concrete.
Yeah.
And they had some injuries, and they finally put up some kind of a net.
Now, in Bellingham, was there a separate switch job that was based in Bellingham?
Yeah. Bellingham had 3 shifts a day of switch engine.
And so places like Ferndale and et cetera would be worked out of Bellingham.
Yes. Yep.
Now, did they interchange with Milwaukee in Bellingham?
Yes, I'm sure they did. I can't tell you where the interchange was, but I'm sure they did.
That was an isolated part of the Milwaukee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, it ran from Bellingham to Sumas.
And I think out to Glacier also, or somewhere out there on the north side of
like that.
Right, Limestone Junction.
Limestone Junction, that's right. And they did the car ferry back to Pier 27.
And they went up to Linden as well.
What about that aluminum plant in Ferndale / Bellingham?
Yes, they built a whole spur for that place, the Intalco spur. It was Intalco aluminum. That wasn't built till the 60s, though, I don't think.
So are you saying that Ferndale plant wasn't even built until the 60s?
Yes.
Correct.
Oh.
It was new then. Where were they getting their ore?
That came in by ship.
Okay.
Yeah. And there was also 2 refineries went in there on that branch too. Arco and Shell, I believe it was. The Shell was right out by the Intalco plant. That was my first pay trip on the railroad. I got a call to Deadhead to Bellingham and worked the Intalco local for a week.
Wow.
That was really interesting for a brand new brakeman.
What was the traffic coming in and out of the refineries there?
Shell mainly had, they were shipping out propane and butane out of there. I didn't see much of anything else. Arco was basically the same, but they also had a coking plant there, and they ran a special coke train out of there to Roberts Bank, maybe once or twice a week. So it was petroleum coke.
And that was for export?
Yes, for export. That's BN, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Intalco branch was laid with track panels, so it was like a logging railroad. You didn't have harmonic rocking. You just bounced up and down because the joints were across from each other. And that's the way they laid logging railroads, just for that purpose, so the cars didn't rock.
My understanding is there were logging railroads on the south side of the Skagit that ran most of the way up to the Sauk River.
Yes, I think you're right. There was one that crossed the NP and the GN at Cedar Woolley that was a logging railroad. It went across both of them on diamonds. Right there near where the GN and the NP cross. And that line ran kind of toward the southeast, northwest to southeast, and the southern end of it went, I think it crossed the river and went south of the river. My brother Bob has an old book with all kinds of maps of those railroads, those logging railroads up there. I don't know if it's still, I'm sure he still has it. But there were a lot of logging railroads around there.
Did they get transferred to the main line at all?
Most of them went either to a dump or directly to a mill. And if they got dumped, they just got dumped into a river to get them to a mill.
Right. So then the mainline railroad would have just had the lumber products.
Right. But there were big logging rafts that were built in Turner Bay, I think it's called, which is right there just west of the Swinomish Reservation off of Similk Bay.
Mm-hmm.
There was a log dump there where they were putting logs in and building rafts. And then there were logs that were log rafts being built in Skagit Bay, south of LaConner. I think a lot of that was supplying the mills in Everett.
My question is to know kind of how the GN and NP and Milwaukee interacted in Everett. Did they exchange cars there very much? Did they switch each other's spurs? You know, that kind of thing.
As far as I know, there wasn't a whole lot of inter-railroad switching. The big one in Everett was Weyerhaeuser Mill B, and that was switched 4 months at a time by each railroad. At the merger, then the BN got it 8 months and the Milwaukee 4. And of course, that went away when the Milwaukee did.
So the Bayside stuff, that was pretty much all GN switching?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And then on the point, that was the craft mill.
Yes.
And that was NP.
Yeah, both railroads switched that one. The GN came in from the long siding end.
Where was that plant you're talking about?
Delta Junction.
Yeah,
Delta
Junction, east of Delta Junction on the point there.
Yeah.
There was the tracks. NP approached it by crossing GN's Y.
Yeah.
To get into the plant. And on the west end, there was a spur to the GN at long siding, I guess.
And what company was that?
Weyerhaeuser.
Oh, that was a Weyerhaeuser craft plant.
Yep.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was just NP, but I'm glad to know that I have some business there too. And then I know that the ironworks at Lowell, that was switched by both GN and Milwaukee, as I recall.
You're talking down at Lowell?
Yeah, down at Lowell, there's some ironworks, and Milwaukee had tracks up into it from the south, and the GN had a track into it from the north. And they jointly switched that ironworks. I can't remember the name of it right now. I have to look it up.
That I don't know
It might have
about.
been gone by BN days.
I think it was. The only thing I remember being at Lowell was it was called Simpson Lee at the merger, but it was Everett Pulp and Paper before that. I think it's possible that was primarily NP, I think, but I think the GN did that too. The paper mill extension, that's where the GN would pick up going eastbound at times. The NP had some work uptown. They went up what they called a turkey trail that had a diamond across the sea line. They had gates on that, but they would go on uptown. They had a freight house up there between Hewitt Avenue and Everett Avenue, and the GN had a freight.
It's called.
Yeah, they went up kind of on the east side of the GN main, and they had the Everett Steel and some other industries up there, and their freight house was further uptown. The Great Northern Freight House was on the west side of their main, and other industries up in there, Washington Stove and some other places like that.
The ironworks is Sumner Ironworks. It was probably gone, but it was on the route to the Milwaukee Freight House.
Yes. Oh, yes. That was up on the side of the hill. I know where you're talking now.
Was that still around then when you were? Oh, okay.
It was there, but I don't know if they were doing business. I don't know if it was open.
Okay. Well, back in
that
DN
was like
days,
that would have been like the southernmost place on the Great Northern spot track.
Right, and then from there it went to just the main line that the NP and the Milwaukee had rights on.
Yes, yes. That was a pretty steep grade coming down there on the Milwaukee.
Yeah, it was because they originally came in across the river and went on a trestle over the GN. So they had a pretty good climb from the GN up there once they abandoned their line across the river. I was going to ask, do you know much about the Seattle traffic, like Interbay and South? I mean, there were trains out of Interbay that went down to serve Longview and ran on the SP&S through the Inside Gateway and stuff like that. So was there a local to Tacoma?
Yes, there was. It was called Crew 3. It was a Tacoma turn out of Interbay.
And what about Auburn? Was there a train to Auburn? Oh, that would have been an NP train.
Yeah, and there was. Crew 4, Crew 6, they were NP jobs.
So what was Crew 4?
Crew 4 was like the Great Northern's Crew 3. It was Stacy Street to Tacoma with a stop at Auburn.
Right, and then how about 6?
6 was the same thing, but it was afternoon call and worked into the night.
And it stopped at Auburn?
Yes.
And was there anything that went to Kent and back, or was Kent worked out of Auburn?
Kent was worked out of Auburn. There was a local base there too.
So really the south end, well, at least in the BN time, was worked out of Auburn. You mean south of Argo, right?
It was worked out of Seattle.
But what job is that?
The south end cruise down to Portland.
No, I meant the local. I'm talking about local. So there was the Renton Rocket going over to Renton.
Yeah.
Was there anything else south of Argo on the BN in terms of local traffic? Because the UP was doing all that stuff down by Boeing Field, right?
Just the crew jobs. Just Crew 4 and 6 and those
came
out of Tacoma.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't think Crew 8 went into Stacy though.
No, okay. So where did it turn around?
They turned around, I think, at Tukwila.
So they worked all that out of Tacoma.
In the NP days, did they ever run anything from Stacy Street through Renton and up the Lake Washington belt line?
I think the NP jobs that worked up that side went out of Auburn.
That's what I kind of thought logically. I'm working on my layout plan, wondering if there's any reason I need to get from Stacy Street to the Beltline to get to Woodinville and up to Everett. But I'm thinking anything I would come out of Stacy to Everett would be along the Sumas branch from Seattle to Woodinville and then to Everett.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Just
Okay.
up to Snohomish and then to Everett. Yeah.
Okay.
Now there was a connection out of Stacy that went up by Interbay and across the draw span by the University of Washington and up through Kenmore, Lake Forest
Right.
Park
And
and
that's on,
Kenmore
that's,
went to
I'm
Woodinville.
modeling, right. I'm
Yeah.
modeling part of that. I'm modeling up to Interbay, and then it goes into staging, or it gets me to Snohomish.
Yeah.
And so that would be Seattle to Everett traffic would go that way on the NP rather than down the belt line and around from the south or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
Woodinville would make a tremendous model railroad.
Yeah.
That was a real hub.
Yeah, I mean, you could spend hours crossing tracks in Woodinville.
So the Woodinville turn, though, in BN days, did that come out of Snohomish or did that come out of Delta?
That came out of Balmer Yard. It went Balmer Yard to Delta, Delta to Snohomish, and then down to Woodinville. The Woodinville
Really?
turn. Yeah.
Wow, that's a roundabout
Really?
way.
Yeah. Well, of course, the line was closed, through the University of Washington up that way.
Right.
It was,
Yeah, back in my days at the UW, they were still shipping coal into the power plant there, or the.
Yeah.
Would it stop and pick up and drop cars in Delta?
Yes, it did.
It would. Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's even more fun for the operator.
Jim, I like your picture behind you. That was my favorite place in the whole wide world. I loved working out of Burlington and was so sad that by the time I hired out, the depot was gone.
Well, that answers a question that I didn't know, which is when did the depot go away?
Yeah.
You mentioned that siding by the depot where they parked the PS&BR.
Yeah.
That actually was the siding that serviced the coal tower.
Ah.
That's what that was about. And the coal tower went away a long time ago.
Yeah.
I'm guessing 20s maybe even. I'm not sure, but I know the GN was all coal-fired steam, quite early here in the area. There's another great picture of Burlington that's taken from somewhere on Burlington Hill, and it shows a train, two trains at the depot, one on either side, north and south, and then also a train each on the branches. And they're all really early, like 440s and stuff like that. It's a great little picture of what railroading was like in the early days. It probably wasn't taken too far in time away from this particular picture.
Hey, Ray, what was the replacement for the depot? What was the shack that the railroad would have used for supporting the crews?
They replaced that depot with the one at MVB, but they had a little brick building across the main line. They called it the Roundhouse, and that's where the crews would gather to get their orders and go to work. Usually the clerks would bring the list up from MVB to this isn't a BN, of course, and
right.
But that's where we'd meet as a crew.
What's MVB?
Mount Vernon Burlington Depot. It was a modern depot they built between Mount Vernon and Burlington. I'm getting a low battery warning here, so I may disappear on you.
All right. Well, we're probably ready to wrap it up for today, but this was really fun.
This was excellent. I really appreciate the information.
Yeah,
it was great.
I wish I could be more help.
No, you're a lot of help.
No.
If you have any really specific questions, I could actually get a hold of Herbie Sandhoff maybe and get some answers too.
Yeah,
just email me.
All right, we'll do.
Okay.
And then I could get a hold of Herbie and see what he has to say.
Great.
Go over there with the tape recorder and get him to ramble on while you record it.
Yeah.
Oh my, wouldn't that be something? He could go on for a few days, I'm sure.
Yeah. Tell me more about that brick building before we hang up.
Okay, it was a small building. I'm guessing maybe about 20 by 30, and it was actually 2 stories, but it had a very steep pitched roof.
Which side of the main line was it?
It was on the west side of the main line, and it would have been a little bit south of the depot. It was right near the switch that went into the Darigold spur on the west side of the main.
I may have that on some of my stuff because I've been doing a lot of research for Burlington. I may have the location where it was, et cetera.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. This is
Yeah.
just what we need to keep doing as we
Yeah, this
develop
is excellent. Thank
our
you.
plans. Yeah, okay.
Bye
Yeah.
bye.
Bye.